Academic Listening Encounters, Life in Society. Listening, Note-Taking, and Discussion by Kim Sanabria. Series Editor Bernard Seal. Published by Cambridge University Press. These CDs contain the listening material for the Academic Listening Encounters, Life in Society Students Book. This recording is copyright. CD 3. Chapter 8. Controlling Crime. Page 114. Listening for Opinions. Step 2. 1.
That's really terrible. What a horrible crime.
2.
I don't know. I guess the woman was wrong. After all, she was taking the son against the father's wishes.
3.
Well, that's a bad thing to do. At least nobody was hurt. But I think those kids should definitely be punished.
4.
Well, I don't know if that's so bad. Who knows? Maybe they had a good reason for refusing to pay the rent.
5.
That's awful. It's horrible how someone can trick an old person that way. Poor woman.
6.
That's not all that bad. I know a lot of teenagers who have done things like that.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 8. Controlling Crime. Page 117. Listening for specific information. Step 2.
Hi, David. I just saw a program on TV that said the juvenile crime was increasing, and I wanted to ask your opinion about how to prevent juvenile crime, because I know that you work with a lot of young people.
Well, first, I think the media exacerbates the problem, and so does the school system. Where I live, we have thousands of security guards in the schools, and metal detectors too, and the kids get searched as they go into school. Now all of that presents the wrong message. The kids don't feel like they're going to school, they feel like they're going to jail, and so they're more likely to lash out and become violent. I think it's a cause and effect relationship. The students get violent because the system makes them like that.
So you're saying that the messages kids get from the media, and even from school, are responsible for making them do bad things?
Yes, I am. I think that every young person is essentially good. I mean, you see violent students who are violent in class, but put them on a one-to-one basis and they're usually very friendly. It's not that they're really bad, it's that they're a product of their environment. If you give them a more caring environment, you really can change the kind of actions they take.
Well, what about all the social support systems?
You see, the problem is that social support systems have really fallen apart. Take, for example, Big Brother, Big Sister programs, or after-school programs. You know, and I don't mean just letting them stay in school until 6 o'clock, doing whatever they want. They should be doing healthy, supervised activities, a structured program of activities, instructional programs, or it could be athletics. A lot of our schools used to have football teams, or basketball teams, or baseball teams, but the funding for programs like those has been cut. They've been eliminated. So that leaves a child with a lot of energy and nothing to do with it.
What do the Big Brother, Big Sister programs do?
Well, they have people a little older, say in their 20s, who are willing to spend time on an individual basis with a student in middle school or in high school. See, the problem is that a lot of kids don't get the one-on-one attention they need. But kids need to see that somebody really cares about them.
But what about kids who really do commit crimes, stealing, pickpocketing, or drug abuse, or something worse? I mean, you do get cases where kids become involved in really serious crimes. I mean, what should be done with kids like that?
Well, let me say that preventing crime is definitely better than punishing it. It's better to have good role models and stop crime before it starts. But we also need harsher punishments. You see some countries where drug crimes carry a maximum sentence of 20 years or life imprisonment, and the crime numbers go down very fast. Having stronger punishment does reduce crime, but you have to be sure that the punishments are fair. We're talking about juvenile crime, but white-collar crime needs to be punished too.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 8, Controlling Crime. Page 118. Listening for main ideas. Step 1.
Amy, because you're a lawyer, I wanted to get your opinion about crime control. And what I'd like to know is, what do you think really works? Not for hardened criminals, but for first-time offenders.
Well, you're asking me a pretty complex question. The first step, of course, is deterrence, to stop people from committing crime in the first place. That involves the economy. Are there enough jobs for everyone? There should be. And the social structure. Are there enough support systems? And so on.
And what about when people are convicted and put in prison?
Then the goal should be to have rehabilitation programs inside prisons, so that when the person comes out, they don't return to a life of crime. The problem is that recently the kinds of programs that existed in the past, like education programs and drug treatment programs, have been cut. And so convicted criminals are not being rehabilitated.
Can you explain a little more about these education programs and drug programs?
Yes. In some states, where the drug laws are very harsh, you end up having a lot of people in prisons who are not the kingpins of drug deals, but are actually drug addicts. The point is that they need help. That's why there need to be programs that have a psychological component and an educational component. Because without these programs, people don't become rehabilitated. The prisoners have a lot of time in their hands, and a culture develops inside the prison. It takes on a life of its own, and gangs start. You see, gangs provide a family away from home. But we need to make prison a less repressive experience. Then we also need bridge programs.
Bridge programs?
Yes, for when they come out of prison. What is clear statistically is that most criminals are recidivists. That means they are repeat offenders. People go into prison, get out, and go right back in again. Bridge programs help with housing and jobs, so that society doesn't look at released prisoners in such a disdainful way, and so that no stigma is attached to them once they re-enter society. But unfortunately, there are only a very small number of these programs.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 8, Controlling Crime. Page 121. Note-taking. Recording numerical information. Step 2.
In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that capital punishment was unconstitutional, but the court reinstated it in 1976. Since then, about 600 executions have been carried out.
I read that according to recent statistics, 67% of Americans favor the death penalty in cases of murder. That's 2/3 of the population.
In the United States, there are about 9 murders a year per 100,000 people. In Japan, for example, that figure is 0.5. In France, it's 1.1.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 8, Controlling Crime. Page 123. Note-taking. Using your notes to ask questions and make comments. Step 1. Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 8, Controlling Crime. Page 123. Note-taking. Using your notes to ask questions and make comments. Step 1. Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 8, Controlling Crime. Page 124. Note-taking. Using your notes to ask questions and make comments. Step 1.
There is probably no issue in criminal justice today more controversial than capital punishment, the death penalty. As you probably know, the United States is the only Western industrialized nation that allows capital punishment. In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that capital punishment was unconstitutional, but the court reinstated it in 1976. Since then, about 600 executions have been carried out. Executions are usually carried out by lethal injection or electrocution. Today, I'd like to talk to you about some of the main arguments against this form of punishment. Of course, the first question most people ask is, does capital punishment deter crime? Well, although there are studies that have linked the increase in executions with a decrease in homicides, a great many social scientists argue that there is no such link. In fact, states with the most executions are also the states with the highest homicide rates. So I do not believe that it is an effective deterrent. The death penalty does not deter murder. My second point is that capital punishment is not used fairly. Nearly all prisoners who are sentenced to death are poor males, and some states, like Louisiana and Mississippi, still use the death penalty, whereas other states, like Iowa, do not. Race is also a factor. Historically, African Americans have been more likely to be executed than whites, both in proportion to the general population and to the prison population. I have another major objection to capital punishment, which is that because we are human, there is always the possibility that we can make mistakes. We always have to question if we have gotten the facts right. According to the Death Penalty Information Center in Washington, at least 96 prisoners were recently released from death row in 22 states because they were improperly convicted or because evidence of their innocence was discovered after they were sentenced to death. In the state of Illinois a few years ago, there were 26 people on death row, and 13 of them were released because new evidence proved that they were innocent. These are 13 people who would have been executed by the state. So in other words, we do make mistakes, and we have to allow for the possibility of that error. Once you execute somebody, you've done something that should not be in the domain of the state. It's almost as if you're playing the role of God on life or death issues. I believe that killing someone is a moral decision, and that it is not a decision the state should make.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 8. Controlling Crime. Page 124. Note-taking. Using your notes to ask questions and make comments. Step 1.
Now I'll take some questions.
Yes, I have a question. Isn't it true that the public supports the death penalty? I read that according to recent statistics, 67% of Americans favor the death penalty in cases of murder. That's 2/3 of the population.
It's true that there is support for the death penalty, but it is also true that people's moods and opinions are difficult to understand through statistics. I think this figure might reflect people's concern about violent crime in general. The United States is by far the most violent industrialized nation. In the United States, there are about 9 murders a year per 100,000 people. In Japan, for example, that figure is 0.5. In France, it's 1.1. So Americans are understandably concerned about violence.
Excuse me, Mr. Stack. What did you say the figure was in the United States?
It's about 9 murders per year per 100,000 people.
I'd like to make a comment. I mean, if someone commits a really bad crime, don't they deserve to be punished just as severely?
The problem with the death penalty is that on an emotional level, you can understand why people want it. If you've suffered the loss of a loved one, your immediate response is to want revenge. It's a normal, natural reaction. But I feel that the reason we have laws is that they allow us to rise above our personal, emotional response to crime. This form of retribution is not the answer. The idea of having laws in a society is that together, as a society, we are stronger than the sum of our parts. We can rise above our personal, emotional response to crime. The legal system is supposed to elevate us. It is set up so that it is better than us. Individually, we are flawed, but as a society, we are strong.
I thought it was interesting what you said about the death penalty not being fair because it was applied to some people but not to others. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. In many ways, capital punishment is very arbitrary. If you really believed in the death penalty as a principle, as a punishment for a horrific crime, then every single person who has committed this crime would have to be executed. But that would mean that we would have about 50,000 executions a year. That's absurd. Nobody would stand for that. It would mean that the state was some kind of killing machine. The fact is that we do execute some people, but other people who have committed similar crimes are not executed. So the death penalty is not applied equally to all people.
Mr. Stack, I'd like to thank you for your comments today. I'm opposed to the death penalty myself, and I don't think we talk enough about these issues.
I'm pleased to come. Thank you.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 9. Cultural Change. Page 129. Recording numerical information. Step 2.
Today's computer has its origins in the distant past. The abacus, a tool for counting, goes back to 500 BC, when it was in common use. But it was not until many centuries later, in 1642, that Pascal invented the first calculating machine. It was not until several centuries after that, in 1938, that the first computing machine was built that used a binary method of operation, the zeros and ones that are the basis of much of today's technology. And in 1956, the term artificial intelligence was first used. A computer with a keyboard and monitor appeared around 1960. The mouse was invented as a time-saving device for giving commands to a computer in 1968. In 1975, the first personal computer was marketed, and the first widely used laptop computer appeared in 1985. In 1997, Deep Blue, a supercomputer, beat the world chess champion in a 6-game match. By that same year, 1997, there was a computer called a teraflop that could perform 1 trillion operations per second.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 9. Cultural Change. Page 131. Listening for opinions. Step 2.
Nina, I'd like to get your opinion on computers. You know, your thoughts about them.
Well, first I think the amount of information that's available to us is absolutely overwhelming. It's much more than people can really take advantage of. And the idea that it will improve our life in some way is not really true. A lot of people don't even have access to computers, so it can't really help them.
Okay, but if you do have a computer, does it help you?
Not sure. It's fun to spend hours a day surfing the net, investigating something that interests you, but then you sort of get lost. Click here, click here, click here, click here. And 5 hours later, you realize that you haven't seen your family today and you've been sitting there chasing down all this information that you think is so important. And yeah, it's wonderful on one hand to have the internet at your disposal, but there's a way that books just bring knowledge alive to you in a completely different way. You get to discuss books with your friends, to share ideas with others. But all people talk about when they're discussing the internet is how much time they wasted.
Yeah, and how annoying those pop-up ads are.
Well, that's another thing. When you turn it on, you have to close the home shopping network that pops up onto your screen. And some people can't be left alone with that.
Like who?
Like my husband. If they say on the ad, this will do this and this, he's like, oh, this will be great. It does this and this. And he clicks, and then a few days later, a package arrives at our house. He bought a scanner, and we can't get it to work. And, oh yeah, an electronic protector that is incompatible with our system. It's frightening. I know a little bit about the internet, but I usually can't find anything I want.
Well, what about computers in general?
Well, in order to understand how much your hard drive can hold, you have to read some book that's about an inch thick. Oh, and they shut down for no apparent reason. They freeze and shut down, and you don't know what happened, and you have to call some special service. It's just a waste of time, and I'd prefer to spend my time in other ways.
So you don't think that modern technology helps our personal relationships, do you?
Well, it's interesting. One thing that I like, actually, is email. I write short messages just to stay in touch with people, and I wouldn't do that if I had to sit down and write a letter and look up their address and find a stamp and put it in an envelope and take it to the post office and remember to mail it. So I really like email, but I also think it becomes an easy way to feel like we've had contact with people, when really you haven't had any contact, or very little. I mean, you toss out some news, but there's been no direct communication. But letters are different. People save them because they were particularly meaningful or remind you of a particular time in your life. And you can look at them years later. You don't have that with email. It's there and it's gone.
That's very true.
And don't forget that computers were touted as a way to get toward the paperless society. We were going to use less paper or no paper, and we were going to save all these trees. But because the computer systems are always shutting down and going wrong, you got to have a backup system. So to me, it almost seems like a trick. Computers might be great for writing and editing things, and everything comes out looking great and all that, but they don't save paper. So in that sense, I think they were misrepresented.
Well, do you think that kids feel differently about technology?
Yeah, I do. Because they've been raised on it. They take it for granted. They learn it when they're young, and they're not intimidated. And they've been playing those games where you shoot down those ugly little faces for so long that they know what they're looking for. So, I think they make better use of it than the average, 40-year-old.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 9. Cultural Change. Page 132. Answering true-false questions. Step 2.
Hi, Kelly. You're 20 now, right?
Right.
What do you think about what Nina said?
I definitely agree that younger people are less intimidated by technology. But when I compare myself with other people my age, I don't see myself as particularly good with computers. Most of my friends are much better with computers than I am. But this summer, I worked in an office with lots of adults, and I realized that I'm a lot more comfortable with technology than they are.
Do you use email a lot?
Well, I do see Nina's point that letters make better keepsakes, but email is just so much more convenient. For example, I'm away at college now, and I don't know how I could keep in touch with my high school friends without email. I like email because it's such a casual form of communication. It's great for just saying hello and checking up on people. For more extended interaction, I still use the phone a lot, but for just telling people that you thought of them that day or that you missed them, email is great.
How often would you say that you email people?
Well, I check my email at least 5 times a day, I would estimate. Actually, probably a bit more. I also have IM configured so that it loads the program automatically whenever I turn on my computer, so I am on that a lot as well. It definitely makes you spend more time on the computer than you meant to. Sometimes I just turn on my computer to check on one little thing, and all of a sudden 3 people send me instant messages, and I talk to them for half an hour. But it's not wasted time because I love to hear from my friends.
So young people are better with computers than adults?
I don't know if kids are really better at computers or just more used to them. Computers can definitely be intimidating, especially when they go wrong. For people who aren't familiar with them, I think a typical response is to use them as little as possible. My dad is like that. But once you get over your initial fear of just fiddling around with them and testing things out, it becomes a lot more fun, and it's really not difficult.
What about your friends?
Well, I guess my generation is hooked on the internet. But people don't make it their whole life. It's just one other thing they like to do. It really opens up a lot of doors, the internet. It makes a lot of things accessible. My college now is a pretty web-based school. At first I was a little bit surprised at how much the internet was used. Like, for example, all of my syllabi for my classes are online.
Do you think the internet has any disadvantages?
Well, something that is bad about the internet is that not everyone has access to it. I feel like when my generation is grown up and part of the workforce, computer skills are just going to be assumed. They won't be an added asset like I think they are today. So what will happen to the people in my generation who don't have these computer skills, you know? They're really going to be at a disadvantage. So I think the internet could increase the disparities between different classes, which is horrible. Or maybe technology just illuminates existing disparities in a different way. I'm not sure. In my own life, though, I love having the internet. I don't know what I'd do without it.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 9, Cultural Change. Page 136. Note-taking. Listening for stress and intonation. Step 2. 1.
Well, what are the skills that you need?
2.
Then you decided where you were going to apply, put your resume with a cover letter in a stamped envelope, and waited anxiously for someone to get back to you.
3.
In fact, technology has not so much changed the process as enhanced it.
4.
You can research employment not just in your city, but also in your state, your region, your country, and even other countries.
5.
In addition to using newspapers and the phone, the internet has become the tool of preference for getting more details on job openings, applications, and other necessary information.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 9, Cultural Change. Page 137. Note-taking. Listening for stress and intonation. Step 1.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Graciano E. Matos. I'm a career counselor, and students often approach me with concerns about their future. You see, we are living in a society of great technological change, and the skills you need now are different from the ones you needed in the past. With the presence of fax machines, advanced telecommunication systems, industrial technology, and the internet, the process of getting a job in today's world and the skills necessary to be successful in your job have changed for the majority of the U.S. population. And although you still need all of the old skills, you also need the new ones. Well, what are the skills that you need? How can you use new technologies to help you? First, let's look at how you find a job. The traditional method of hunting for a job in the past required first doing research on jobs that were available in your field, typically by looking in newspapers, TV ads, and making phone calls to prospective employers. Then you decided where you were going to apply, put your resume with a cover letter in a stamped envelope, and waited anxiously for someone to get back to you. Well, today, maybe the job search and application process are very much the same, but the tools used are much more advanced, and they require more skills and expertise. In fact, technology has not so much changed the process as enhanced it. The benefit, both for the employer and the employee, is that this makes the search more open to people of different socioeconomic backgrounds from all over the world. But as more people are involved, it becomes more competitive for the applicant than it ever was before. The secret to preparing yourself for the working world today is learning these new and ever-changing tools and combining them with the older methods people have been using for years. For example, the Internet. The Internet should be used as a giant newspaper in which the pages are constantly changing. You can research employment not just in your city, but also in your state, your region, your country, and even other countries. In addition to using newspapers and the phone, the Internet has become the tool of preference for getting more details on job openings, applications, and other necessary information. In the past, you might have had a desk full of newspaper ads just to keep track of where you should apply. But now, you can copy information from a web page and paste it into a Microsoft Word document that's easy to access and print anytime. In many ways, it's easier now. You don't have to worry about paying for a stamp and walking to the nearest post office. Just type your job application, click, and send it through email. It gets there in an instant.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 9, Cultural Change. Page 138. Note-taking. Using your notes to answer test questions. Step 2.
So, the procedures for finding a job and sending an application have changed quite a lot. Now, let's talk about actually getting the job. You need to be able to participate well in an interview, because in most jobs, you will need to interact with colleagues and clients, not only face-to-face, but in telephone conversations too. You will need to express yourself well and have excellent control of what you want to say and how to say it. These skills are needed more than ever in today's high-pressure world. Each company where you have an interview will expect you to know something about the work they do and have intelligent questions and comments during the interview. And when they hire you, you'll be expected to complete multiple tasks and be willing to move around and work in different areas of the company. Of course, there are also certain technological skills that are expected of people today. Every situation is unique, but let's take as an example a position in an office environment. This type of position requires basic to advanced knowledge of computer applications. You have to know how to write a simple but professional-looking letter, and you have to know how to put together a presentation in Microsoft PowerPoint with basic effects and organize data in a spreadsheet program. Advanced users should know how to create and organize a database. If you are looking for any type of administrative work, you can forget about the good old days of paper calendars, Rolodexes, and file cabinets. Now, we have links to digital databases that store all the information that used to be kept on paper, such as appointments, clients' records, and other important information. Many departments use spreadsheet programs to keep track of all transactions, costs, and profits. These programs are essential to an organization's survival as well as your career survival. Let's continue with our basic example of a typical job in an office. Now that you know about the skills necessary to be productive in the office of the 21st century, you must have a plan for how to acquire these skills. The first thing you should have in mind is that in the same manner that technology has become a vital part of a modern organization's life, it should also become part of yours. Whenever given a chance, you should enhance your keyboard skills. Email your friends. Practice with PowerPoint. Try making simple posters to announce an event, like a party or some activity that you and your friends will do together. You can even practice with pre-made databases by storing telephone numbers and addresses. The best advice I can give anyone is to play with the computer in your free time and become familiar with its operating system, software, and hardware. Try to figure out what each program does and how to use it to your benefit. A computer class on the level of your expertise is also recommended to perfect those skills you learned on your own. Learning more advanced functions is highly recommended as well. It's easy to look through books and free tutorials found on the internet. Even novice users can learn how to create professional-looking flyers, business cards, and other documents you will need in the workplace. This is the advice I give to the students I counsel, and I hope it's been helpful for you.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 10. Global Issues. Page 142. Personalizing the topic. Step 2. 1. Two. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. Nine.
Hey, this is my spot.
Sorry, it's taken. It's mine.
No, I've been waiting here.
Look,
I've been.
I don't have time for this.
I've been waiting for him to pull out. This is my. You're gonna have to get out of the spot because this is.
Look,
no, you did not get here first. I've been waiting patiently for him to pull
you're
out.
gonna have to wait a little
No,
longer.
you're gonna have to get out of here so I can pull in.
Ten. Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 10. Global Issues. Page 144. Retelling what you have heard. Step 2.
Barbara, what's interesting to you about living in the city? Why do you like it?
Well, I'm just a city girl. One time I bought a house in the country to escape from the urban ills, and then found myself totally bored with country life because you have to drive everywhere, and there's not much to do. I'm used to the fast pace of the city. There's a whole variety of museums, movies, coffee shops, and places to interact with people. But sitting alone in the country, you know, unless you like to grow or garden or putter around and build things with your hands.
Okay, but what about for vacation? I mean, lots of city people rent vacation houses in the country.
But to me, going to the country for a vacation makes no sense at all. There's so much work to do. First, you have to get there. And then, I don't know. I think I can relax better in the city. Besides, the country has bugs. There you are, supposedly enjoying yourself in the fresh country air, but you're being eaten alive by a variety of different bugs. You can't enjoy yourself. You're being stung and eaten to death. You can't relax. Let's put it this way. If you like boredom, you'll like the country. People who like a lot of stimulation, you know, can't hack it. And then there's the transportation thing. I mean, to get a carton of milk, you have to drive 3 miles. So the whole car culture thing kicks in. Give me the city anytime.
Well, what would you say is the one thing you like most about the city?
The interactive social life. People get together. I like it when you call up and people say, "Come on over," and you hang out together, and it's just fun.
Yeah, and what about the suburbs?
Well, that's even more hateful than the country to me.
Why?
Well, the suburbs don't even have any of the good country air. There's nothing to do. You're just stuck there. And for young people, there are all sorts of problems. Alcohol, drugs, you have to drive everywhere. Look, I go to my friend's house in the suburbs. Do you ever see anyone walking in the street? No. It's totally zero. There's nothing going on. What can I say, you know? It's not for me. I do have 1 or 2 suburban friends who like it, because they make a barbecue and the birds are chirping. But not me. Oh, and then there's another thing I really hate. In the city, you can make mistakes, but you always get a second chance. But in the country and the suburbs, you're labeled. You feel like, wow, that's it, you're labeled. And that label doesn't come off easily.
Well, do you think the city is lonely or dangerous?
No. In the city, people live in little communities. They have interactive social lives, and I don't think the city is particularly dangerous.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 10. Global Issues. Page 145. Listening for details. Step 2.
Can you tell me about the different places you've lived, Kenny?
I grew up in a big city, New York, but I always thought I would want to live somewhere else.
And did you move?
I did. What finally drove me out of New York was the traffic. I felt stuck in the city, like I was trapped. I'd always spent summers in the country, in Maine, in the woods, on a lake, and I felt free there, but I wasn't ready to be in the country full time. So for the next 7 years, we lived in a small town.
And was that better?
No, I never liked it. I moved back to New York because of my kids. I didn't want them cheering for different sports teams.
And do you feel better about life in the city now?
Well, I have my ups and downs. What bothers me most about the urban lifestyle is still the traffic and the parking. Here's an example for you. One time my mother was dropping my daughter off after taking her to a play. This is just a law-abiding grandmother doing what normal grandmothers love to do, hanging out with her grandchildren and taking her to a show. Okay, so she comes to drop my daughter off, and of course there's no parking. My mother is 75, and she needs a little break. So despite not having a legal parking spot, she steps inside the house before driving another 45 minutes home. She was in the house 5 minutes, and it cost her $50. She got a parking ticket. I mean, taking our grandchild to a show doesn't cause stress in the suburbs, but in the big city, it's a big deal.
How does your wife feel?
Well, for my wife, it's the dirt that bothers her.
Doesn't that bother you too?
No, I don't really mind the dirt. I suppose I'm used to it. Other people complain about graffiti, but that doesn't really bother me either.
So, on the whole, would you say you prefer city living to other places?
Well, the thing is I like big cities. I also like the wild, remote places in the country. I don't like anything in between, like small cities or suburbs. I think small towns are the worst. I mean, if you're going to have a lot of buildings and cars, at least you should have a lot of interesting people. People are the best part of cities. If you're not going to have people on the streets, then please give me some trees, streams, boulders, animals.
Well, besides the interesting people, is there any other thing you like about the city?
I know it's weird, but I especially love the city on gray, drizzly days.
You do?
Yeah. It's beautiful how the gray of the buildings blends in with the gray of the sky. But on bright, sunny days, I hate it. I want to be on a mountain, hiking in the woods, something like that. But because of the traffic, I don't go anywhere except the park usually. It's frustrating on those sunny days, so I can only be truly happy in the city when the weather is bad.
So, what's your idea of the ideal place to live?
The ideal place to live would be a big city that ends suddenly. And then right away you're in a rural area. So on rainy days, I'd stay home and watch the rain. And on sunny days, I'd go mountain climbing. And at night, I'd have a choice. I could camp out and cook burgers, or go home and order Chinese takeout.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 10. Global Issues. Page 151. Note-taking. Using handouts to help you take notes. Step 1. Excerpt from Part 1 of the lecture. Handout 1.
I'd like you to take a look at the first handout, which is part of a classic study published by Ebenezer Howard a century ago. It shows 3 magnets representing what he calls town, country, and town-country. You'll see immediately that he lists pros and cons for each environment. For example, the country has beauty of nature, but long hours and low wages. The town has social opportunity, but isolation. What's interesting about the 3 magnets is that although it was written in 1898, it identifies many of the same reasons that people are still being pulled away from rural areas and into urban or suburban environments.
Excerpt from Part 2 of the lecture. Handout 2.
Cities are also changing shape in other ways. Look at Handout 2. The concentric zone model represents the structure of some cities built at the beginning of the 20th century. The business district is in the center, surrounded by the other zones. but the sector model and the multiple nuclei model are probably more typical of the cities we know today. They show the urban sprawl that's occurring in contemporary cities. Urban sprawl basically means that cities are spreading out, often in an uncontrolled way. Notice that in these two models, the business district is close to all the other districts.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 10, Global Issues. Page 152. Note-taking. Combining the skills. Step 1.
Good morning, and welcome to today's lecture. Today we're going to discuss the mass urbanization of the world's population, which is an unprecedented trend worldwide. I'd like you to take a look at the first handout, which is part of a classic study published by Ebenezer Howard a century ago. It shows three magnets representing what he calls town, country, and town-country. You'll see immediately that he lists pros and cons for each environment. For example, the country has beauty of nature, but long hours and low wages. The town has social opportunity, but isolation. What's interesting about the three magnets is that although it was written in 1898, it identifies many of the same reasons that people are still being pulled away from rural areas and into urban or suburban environments. In this lecture, I'll focus on two major reasons why people are moving to cities. Well, the first reason is economic. People are moving to the cities because that's where they can find jobs and earn money. Until the 20th century, the major source of employment, full and part-time, was farming. However, the need for people to work on the land gets less and less as we are able to do more and more things by machine. Now, no more than 15% of all jobs are connected to farming. Jobs now are being created in information technology, manufacturing, and service areas such as tourism and financing. And all of these new jobs are in or around major cities. The second reason for the move to cities has to do with quality of life issues, comfort and convenience. For example, most of us would like our children to receive a good education, and cities often offer better schools. And then, for many, city life is just more comfortable. There are transportation networks, shops, and places of entertainment. An interesting consequence of urbanization is that the average age of people in the countryside is increasing, while that of the cities is falling. More old people stay in the countryside than young people, and the opposite is true in the cities. This is, of course, connected to the fact that it's the young people who want jobs.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 10, Global Issues. Page 154. Note-taking. Combining the skills. Step 1.
Now I'd like to identify three key changes in our cities. First of all, they're getting bigger and bigger. For the first time in history, there will soon be more people living in urban areas than in rural environments. Think about that for a minute. Most cities are bigger now than ever before. Tokyo, Mexico, Bombay, Sao Paulo are among the largest cities in the world. And each of these cities will soon have approximately 20 million people. In 1950, New York City was the only city with a population of 10 million. For the first time in the history of society, we now have many cities with populations of over 10 million people, what we call megacities. Tokyo, Mexico, Bombay, and Sao Paulo are just a few examples of today's megacities. And experts say that the number of megacities will increase in the future. Cities are not just getting bigger, they're also changing shape. They're getting taller because land is getting more and more expensive. So instead of having a few big houses on a piece of land, we can have a tall apartment building that 1,000 people can live in. All of you can probably think of buildings or parks or stores that have been torn down to make room for bigger, taller, or more modern buildings. Skyscrapers have become a symbol of modern cities, like the recently constructed Taipei 101 Tower in Taiwan. Now it's the tallest building in the world, 1,674 feet high. Cities are also changing shape in other ways. Look at handout 2. The concentric zone model represents the structure of some cities built at the beginning of the 20th century. The business district is in the center, surrounded by the other zones. But the sector model and the multiple nuclei model are probably more typical of the cities we know today. They show the urban sprawl that's occurring in contemporary cities. Urban sprawl basically means that cities are spreading out, often in an uncontrolled way. Notice that in these two models, the business district is close to all the other districts. Another change in the shape of cities is that cities now tend to become linked to each other, like Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto in Japan, which has a huge combined population. This sprawl often occurs in random and unpredictable ways and has a huge impact on the quality of life of city residents. The third change is that our cities are breaking up into smaller communities, often by ethnic group or income level. Of course, many cities do have a kind of identity or personality, but a city is not homogeneous. For example, migrants to the cities often want to live in their own communities or with people from a similar cultural background. Another example is that if you are moving from a smaller community to a city, you will be most likely to move close to friends or family members who will help you get a job or give you support. However, this often means that people stay within their community and do not come into contact with others from different backgrounds. How will cities continue to change in the future? Well, we can predict that cities will continue to grow in the future. The biggest challenge facing us now is to improve the quality of life in cities, because sadly, they don't always offer the economic security, the safety, or the comfort they promise. Many cities have slum areas or ghettos where people live in dangerous or destitute conditions. The beautiful architecture and vibrant nightlife are one face of the city, but cities also have problems of inequality, crowding, and poverty.
Now complete the steps in your book. This is the end of the audio program. Thank you for listening.